No sooner did industrialization take hold than it began to undergo an evolution in the creation of new products. Given the issues that industrialization presented to society and culture as a whole, numerous artists and writers now began to develop responses to the new and, perceived by many, negative culture that industrial activity created. Others now confronted the issues of the growing populations of the cities by developing newer and better methods of public health, agitating for governmental reforms, and changing the dynamic between men and women in the new society.
When one speaks of the industrial shift of the early 19th century, one is talking about the movement away from textile industry, that is the wool and the cotton and the weaving industry, and toward iron and the use of iron, the refinement of iron into steel, and the creation of instruments, products based on iron and steel. Mostly this goes along with the increase in railroad transportation, as the railroads become the ultimate expression of industrialization, the ultimate product of industrialization. Of course, the engines themselves, the boilers, the rails, the various other materials that go into railroads now become the chief methods or chief products of industrialization. Now, as you have mass industrialization growing, there are plenty of issues that industrialization brings to the people in the factories. There's danger in the factories. The factories are dangerous places. There's a lot of injury, there's a lot of death. There's child labor, and therefore many people start to enact child labor laws to curtail. This is one of the things that King William IV of England is going to be well known for. Women and children were prohibited from working in mines or more dangerous factories. As a result, governments issued codes, inspection codes, conducted inspections. You see the role of government increasing. Because of factories, urban areas in Britain swelled, and with the proximity of people living to each other, that means you're going to have an increase in the birth rate. The closer people are, the more they tend to procreate. It's just a simple matter of fact. Health codes and housing programs now are enacted to make sure that people have proper sanitation, proper sewage, houses that are up to code and are not filthy, squalid huts or cubicles. You also have, when the workers come home, they will want to go and throw down a pint. Or if they're single, or even if they're not single, they will want to go and relieve their sexual tensions with brothels. So you have ale houses and brothels. And all of this, of course, leads to problems of public health, as we have well understood now in the past year and a half or so of this pandemic. Industrialization changes the landscape, but it also changes the cityscape. This is Manchester, England. You can see how it has been changed by the industrial age. Whereas one time, the tallest buildings, or the ones that were most featured in the skyline, were the church steeples. Now the smokestack has become the most prominent aspect of a city's skyline. This age of industrialization has an effect on art and literature. Elizabeth Barrett Browning, one of the great poets of England, wrote many poems, but she also became a public activist. She denounced child labor. Sir Charles Barry, one of the great architects, in response to the industrial age, now begins to design buildings and churches throughout all of England. He rebuilt the Houses of Parliament, rebuilt the Palace of Westminster after the Great Fire of 1834. Photography is an aspect of the industrial age. Daguerreotype photography is the type of photography used in the early 1800s. Daguerreotype means that the negative is actually a silver plate that has chemical treatments on it. Unlike later photography that'll use glass as a negative, and then later on the film will become a negative. But the real movement forward in literature during the 19th century is the novel. The novel could reach the largest number of readers. And novels were often published in serial form. That is, each chapter was published every month, or maybe sometimes every week. And it would often be written in such a way that you couldn't wait to get the next chapter. It's very much like the graphic novels of today. Now, who are some of the great novelists of the time? There's Honoré de Balzac. Balzac presents a panorama of society in the post-Napoleonic age. His greatest work was La Comédie Humaine, the Human Comedy, which was a huge multi-volume collection of interlinked novels and stories depicting French society during the period of the Restoration, the Bourbon Restoration of 1815 to 1830, and the July Monarchy, which we will get to, which is the reign of King Louis Philippe. Balzac had a genius for observation. He created human types that are strikingly true. Some of his characters are so vivid that they have become archetypes. Charles Dickens was the greatest novelist of the Victorian era, without a doubt. He focused on the working class. Many people know about Dickens, but very few people actually know Dickens. Dickens was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, England. He left school to work in a factory when his father was put into debtor's prison. He lacked a formal education, but he edited a weekly journal for 20 years, wrote 15 novels, 5 novellas, hundreds of short stories, and nonfiction articles. He lectured and performed readings extensively. He was an indefatigable letter writer. He campaigned vigorously for children's rights, education, and other social reforms. He pioneered the serial publication, and he invented the cliffhanger. That is, leaving the reader with, what happens next? I got to come back to the next chapter. And it influences many forms of entertainment today. We're very familiar with his novels, A Tale of Two Cities, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, The Pickwick Papers, Great Expectations, and of course his most famous story, A Christmas Carol. Dickens's stories became so popular that he probably raised England's literacy level 10% because he wanted people to learn how to read, just to read his stories. Charlotte Bronte. She was the eldest of the Bronte sisters. She wrote on women's issues. Her most famous novel was Jane Eyre, and it follows the experiences of a young woman named Jane Eyre, who is the heroine of the story, her growth to adulthood, and her love for Mr. Rochester, the brooding master of Thornfield Hall, with his dark secret kept in a room.
One major social critic of the age was Elizabeth Mouton Barrett Browning. Born the eldest of 11 children, she suffered intense head and spinal pain her entire life and survived by taking laudanum, a morphine and alcohol mixture, and this made her frail her entire life. She campaigned for the abolition of slavery, and her work helped influence reform in the child labor area, increasing legislation to regulate it. She married a fellow poet by the name of Robert Browning in a private ceremony in Italy, and her father disinherited her for this. Because of her dark complexion, Robert Browning called her his little Portuguese. Her prolific output made her a rival to Lord Tennyson as a candidate for Poet Laureate on the death of William Wordsworth. She had a tremendous influence on the American Romantic writers, such as Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson. Her most famous poems were Aurora, Lxii, and How Do I Love Thee, which comes from the sonnets from the Portuguese. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being an ideal grace. I love thee to the level of every day's most quiet need, by sun and candlelight. I love thee freely, as men strive for right. I love thee purely, as they turn from praise. I love thee with the passion put to use in my old griefs, and with my childhood's faith. I love thee with the love I seem to lose, with my lost saints. I love thee with the breath, smiles, tears of all my life. And if God choose, I shall but love thee better after death.
In 1834, the Houses of Parliament caught on fire and burned, and J.M.W. Turner watched the fire, and he painted several canvases depicting it, including the burning of the Houses of Lords and Commons in 1835. Sir Charles Barry was the English architect who rebuilt the Palace of Westminster. This is where the Houses of Parliament are kept. Big Ben, officially called Elizabeth Tower. Big Ben only refers to the largest bell in the tower. That's to the right. The Victoria Tower sticks up from the left. It's called the Palace of Westminster because Westminster Abbey is right next to it. Throughout England, many churches and castles and manors bear the imprint of Sir Charles Barry. Here one sees an aerial view of the Palace of Westminster, with Westminster Abbey located off to the upper right. Barry used what was known as Italianate style and the palazzo design, an example of which one can actually see on Canal Street here in New Orleans at what is called the Pickwick Club, which is the main club of the old crew of Comus, which is the oldest of all the Mardi Gras crews. This is an example of daguerreotype photography. You'll notice the scratches and so forth because the silver plate was prone to scratching. This picture is, of course, of one Abraham Lincoln when he was but 37 years old and in his only term in Congress from Illinois. From left to right, there's Balzac, Dickens, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning again. When one utters Balzac's name, one should always do it with the left hand on the chest and with some drama in the voice. Balzac. With urbanization came the arrival of middle-class reformers who sought to make life more tolerable in the cities. Some of these were religious reforms. In the growing impersonal industrial world that people lived in, many people turned toward religion, toward revival. There was a second great awakening in the United States at around this same time. Many of these religious reforms were led by religious women, and they targeted prostitution and alcohol consumption, an attempt to get a hold on vice in the cities. You also had governmental reforms. Government is becoming more and more a part of people's lives. The Starvation Act was an attempt to curb the growing indigent population. It established the poorhouse, or what is known as the workhouse, to cure, quote unquote, people of the dishonorable state of poverty as it was viewed back then. At first, poorhouses or workhouses were farms where crop tending and manual labor was conducted. But soon the workhouse became a hideous institution. It was a place to be feared. It was more hideous than living on the street, as poverty was seen as something to be punished. And numerous legislators did not believe that it was the role of government to actually provide work. And so when they did provide work, it was backbreaking and often useless. The government also tries to get a handle on lower class sports, such as animal fighting, dog and cockfighting, so to speak. A number of societal reforms come about during the industrial age. It came about because of the cult of domesticity, where women who were subjugated to men in the middle and upper classes stayed at home. But staying at home doesn't mean you can't leave your home. It means that you're relegated to the domestic sphere. This allows women to develop very strong networks with other domestic women. And they form these networks and then associations, which in turn begin to agitate for reforms. And when they agitate for the reforms, they get rather successful at it. So successful that they begin to think, you know, if we only had the vote, things would really get done. And so suffrage comes out of this. Now, women in the lower classes, they had less time and less means to join such associations, so they worked for a living. So women were not completely relegated to the domestic sphere, just upper and middle class women.